In the cotton country of the American South, there were families who owned almost nothing, who farmed land that belonged to another man and gave up half or more of everything they raised. The sharecroppers and tenant farmers lived closer to the bone than almost anyone in the nation's history, and the system was stacked against them at every turn. And yet they survived. They fed their children, kept their families together, and held on to a dignity that no debt and no landlord could take. They did it on skill, on community, and on a deep, hard-won knowledge of how to make something out of almost nothing. Here is what the history books leave out. She knew never to throw out the pot likker, the rich, dark broth left in the pot, full of vitamins cooked out of the greens, which the family sopped up with cornbread. Nothing of the greens was wasted, and this humble dish provided essential nutrition that kept the family healthy on a meager diet. Number 17. Raising hogs and the fall hog killing. A family that could keep even 1 or 2 hogs had meat and fat for the year, and your great-grandfather raised them on scraps, garden waste, and forage, then killed them in the cold of late fall. Every part was used, the hams and shoulders cured and smoked, the fat rendered to lard, the trimmings made into sausage, the feet and organs cooked fresh. The hog killing was a vital event, and the preserved pork flavored the family's beans and greens all year long. Number 16. Keeping chickens for eggs and meat. A flock of chickens scratching in the yard gave the family eggs through much of the year and meat for special occasions, and your great-grandmother tended them carefully, feeding them scraps and letting them forage. The eggs were a daily source of protein, and a hen too old to lay went into the pot for Sunday dinner. The chickens cost almost nothing to keep, turned waste into food, and provided a steady, reliable source of nourishment that the family controlled completely. Number 15. Canning and preserving the harvest. Second pattern break. When the garden produced in summer, your great-grandmother preserved every bit she could against the lean winter months, canning vegetables, putting up preserves, and storing what would keep. Jars of food lining the shelves were the family's security, the proof that they would eat when the garden was bare. She canned with care and skill, knowing that every jar was a meal saved for a hungry month, and her preserving work stretched the abundance of one season across the whole year. Number 14. Foraging the fields and woods. The land offered food to those who knew where to look, and your great-grandmother gathered wild greens like poke and dandelion, picked blackberries and wild plums, hunted for nuts, and knew the wild plants that could feed and heal the family. This foraging supplemented the garden and added vital variety and nutrition to the diet at no cost at all. The knowledge of which wild things were good to eat and when to gather them was passed down carefully and made the difference in the hardest times. Number 13. Fishing the rivers, ponds, and creeks. Free protein swam in every nearby body of water, and your great-grandfather and the children fished the rivers, ponds, and creeks for catfish, bream, and whatever else would bite. A good catch meant a fish fry that fed the whole family, and maybe the neighbors too. Fishing required only patience and simple gear, and it provided a reliable source of fresh meat that cost nothing but time. The knowledge of where the fish held and how to take them was a valued part of feeding the family. Number 12. Making do and mending everything. Third pattern break. With almost no money for anything new, your great-grandmother kept the family clothed and equipped by mending, patching, and remaking until nothing usable was left. She turned flour and feed sacks into dresses and shirts, pieced worn clothing into quilts, and made every scrap serve again. The skill of stretching a tiny amount of cloth and cash across the needs of a whole family was a constant, demanding labor, and her ability to make do was as essential to survival as any garden. Number 11. Herbal home remedies. A doctor was a luxury the family could rarely afford, so your great-grandmother was the household's healer, treating illness and injury with remedies made from plants she gathered and grew. She knew the teas, poultices, and tonics that eased a fever, calmed a cough, and tended a wound, knowledge passed down through generations of women who had no other medicine. This home doctoring kept the family well in a world where professional care was out of reach, and it carried real wisdom about the healing power of common plants. Number 10. Quilting and the warmth of the family. The quilts that kept the family warm through winter were made by your great-grandmother from the scraps and remnants of worn-out clothing, pieced together in patterns of beauty and meaning. Quilting was both a practical necessity and a cherished craft, often done together with other women in a gathering that strengthened the bonds of the community. A good quilt represented countless hours of work and the saving of every usable scrap, turning rags into warmth and turning labor into something lasting and beautiful. Number 9. Stretching the cornmeal and the staples. The family's diet rested on a few cheap staples: cornmeal, beans, rice, and molasses, and your great-grandmother knew 100 ways to turn them into filling, varied meals. From cornmeal alone, she made cornbread, hoe cakes, mush, and dumplings, and she stretched a small amount of meat across a big pot of beans to feed many mouths. The skill of making humble staples satisfying and nutritious, day after day, year after year, was the quiet foundation of keeping a family fed and content. Number 8. The barter and trade economy. With little cash ever changing hands, your great-grandparents survived through a web of barter and trade with neighbors, swapping eggs for sugar, labor for the use of a mule, a mess of greens for a piece of meat. This informal economy let families get what they could not buy, and it bound the community together in mutual dependence. The skill of trading fairly and knowing the value of what one had to offer was an essential part of getting by when money was almost never available. Number 7. Community and mutual aid. No family survived this life alone, and your great-grandparents leaned on a deep network of family, neighbors, and church that shared food, labor, and care through every hardship. When a family fell sick, the neighbors brought food and worked their field. When a baby came or a loved one died, the community gathered. This mutual aid was the safety net in a world that offered them none, and the bonds of helping and being helped were as vital to survival as any crop in the ground. Number 6. Wasting absolutely nothing. This is the principle that connects everything else. In your great-grandmother's kitchen and your great-grandfather's field, nothing was ever wasted, not a scrap of food, not a piece of cloth, not a drop of fat, not an hour of labor. Every leaving was used, every remnant repurposed, every resource stretched to its absolute limit. This total economy of waste, born of having so little, was a discipline and a genius that allowed families to survive on what others would consider nothing at all, and it is perhaps the most valuable lesson they have to teach us. The forgetting came as the families left the cotton fields for the cities and the north, seeking the better lives they deserved, and chose to leave the hardship of that world behind them. The skills that had sustained them through impossible times were set down, often deliberately, as a painful chapter closed. But that knowledge was real, and it was extraordinary, and it deserves to be remembered with respect. Here is your challenge. Pick one, just one. Learn to cook a pot of greens and save the pot likker. Grow a small intensive garden in poor soil. Learn to stretch simple staples into a week of meals. Tell me in the comments which one you'll try, and tell me if your family came up through hard times like these, because somebody in your family tree knew every skill on this list. That knowledge did not die. It just went quiet. It is time to start listening again.